The painting that hid a skull for 500 years. Have you ever looked at a painting and felt like it was watching you back? Not because of the people inside it, not because of the colors, but because something about it feels wrong. A strange shape stretches across the floor. It doesn't match the rest of the painting. It looks unfinished, almost like the artist accidentally dragged his brush across the canvas and never bothered to fix it. For centuries, people stared at that shape, trying to figure out what it was. Some thought it was a piece of broken wood. Others believed it was nothing more than a strange artistic mistake. One museum employee even suggested it was the bone of a fish. But every one of them was wrong, because that strange shape wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. A hidden message so carefully designed that it can only be understood from one exact position. And once you finally see it, you can never unsee it again. This is the Ambassadors. Painted in 1533 by Hans Holbein the Younger, it has become one of the most famous paintings in history. At first glance, it seems simple. Two wealthy men, a shelf filled with expensive objects, a beautifully decorated room. Nothing unusual. But almost every single object inside this painting was placed there for a reason. Every instrument, every book, every piece of clothing, even the floor beneath their feet. Together, they tell a story far bigger than the two men standing before us. A story about power, religion, politics, death, and a Europe that was slowly falling apart. Let's begin with the men themselves. Standing on the left is Jean de Dintville. He was the French ambassador to the court of King Henry VIII. Only 29 years old, yet already trusted with one of the most important diplomatic missions in Europe. Holbein wanted everyone who looked at this painting to understand that immediately. That's why Dintville isn't dressed like an ordinary nobleman. His coat is lined with luxurious fur. His clothing is made from some of the finest fabrics available in the 16th century. Around his neck hangs a large medallion. Every detail quietly announces his wealth, his influence, and his importance. But Holbein hides another clue. Resting beneath Dintville's hand is a dagger. On its handle is the number 29. Not a random decoration. His age. The painting isn't simply showing us who he is. It's documenting exactly where he stood in life at that moment. Now look at the man beside him. His name was Georges de Selve, a bishop, a scholar, and one of the church's rising intellectuals. Unlike Dintville, he isn't surrounded by displays of luxury. His clothing is darker, more reserved, less political, more spiritual. But Holbein leaves another hidden signature. Beside him rests a book, marked with the number 25. His age: two men, 29, 25. One representing political power, the other representing religious authority. Standing together during one of the most dangerous years in European history. At first they seem calm, almost peaceful. But nothing about this painting is peaceful. Because the real story isn't about the men. It's about everything between them. Your eyes naturally move toward the shelves. They appear to be filled with expensive scientific instruments. Globes, sundials, astronomical devices, navigation tools. To a modern viewer, they simply look impressive. But in 1533, these weren't decorations. They represented mankind's greatest achievements. They symbolized intelligence, discovery, control over nature itself. Europe was entering an age where science was beginning to challenge old beliefs. People were measuring the stars, mapping the oceans, calculating time with incredible precision. These objects celebrated humanity's growing confidence. But then, your eyes move to the lower shelf, and the mood changes completely. Instead of scientific triumph, you find music, books, mathematics, objects connected to learning and culture. Among them sits a beautiful lute, perfectly painted. Every shadow, every reflection, every tiny piece of wood, until you notice one small detail. One string is broken. It seems insignificant, almost invisible. Yet Renaissance artists rarely painted anything by accident. A broken lute string had a very specific meaning. It symbolized disagreement, conflict, a harmony that had been destroyed. Holbein could have painted the instrument perfectly. Instead, he deliberately left one string broken. Why? Because Europe itself was beginning to break apart. And the clues don't stop there. Next to the lute lies an open mathematics book. Not randomly opened, carefully positioned on one exact page. A page carrying one simple word: divide. To most people, it's just a mathematical instruction. But in 1533, that word meant far more than numbers. It described an entire continent. Kings were turning against popes. Churches were splitting into rival faiths. Friends were becoming enemies. Families were choosing different sides. Europe was dividing, and Holbein knew exactly what was coming. Yet this was only the beginning. Because once you understand what was happening outside this room, every object inside the painting suddenly begins speaking an entirely different language. But to understand why Holbein filled this painting with hidden clues, you first have to understand the world he was living in. Because in 1533, Europe wasn't simply changing, it was breaking. And the people inside this painting were standing directly in the middle of that storm. Hans Holbein the Younger wasn't just another painter. He was one of the greatest portrait artists of the Renaissance. Born in Germany around 1497, Holbein built a reputation unlike almost anyone else of his time. Most artists painted faces. Holbein painted identities. Every wrinkle, every thread, every reflection of light. Nothing escaped his brush. His portraits were so realistic that they almost felt like photographs. Created nearly 400 years before photography even existed. That incredible attention to detail earned him powerful clients across Europe. Eventually, his talent brought him to England. And there, he entered the court of one of history's most unpredictable kings, Henry VI, the same king remembered today for his 6 wives. But behind those famous marriages was a political crisis that changed the course of history forever. Henry desperately wanted to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. But there was one problem. Only the Pope had the authority to approve such a divorce. And the Pope refused. For years, Henry waited, negotiated, argued. Nothing changed. Finally, he made a decision that shocked all of Europe. Instead of obeying Rome, He would create his own church, the Church of England, a single decision that divided an entire nation. Suddenly, neighbors belonged to different religions. Families argued over faith. Kings challenged popes, and loyalty became more dangerous than ever before. It wasn't just a religious disagreement. It became a political battlefield. Every public statement mattered. Every conversation carried risk. Even paintings could become political weapons. That is exactly why The Ambassadors is so extraordinary. At first glance, it looks like a celebration of wealth and intelligence. But underneath, it quietly documents a civilization falling apart. Let's go back to those objects, because none of them are random. Look again at the instruments on the top shelf. There are globes, astronomical tools, sundials, devices used to calculate the movement of the heavens. During the Renaissance, these represented mankind's greatest scientific achievements. Humanity believed it was finally beginning to understand God's universe. But something strange happens when historians study these instruments closely. Many of them don't quite agree with each other. Some point toward different times. Others appear slightly misaligned. For years, art historians wondered whether Holbein had simply made mistakes. But that explanation never really fit. This was an artist famous for microscopic precision. Someone who painted individual hairs, tiny reflections, and the texture of silk with unbelievable accuracy. If anything looked incorrect, there was probably a reason. Some researchers believe Holbein intentionally created small inconsistencies to symbolize a world that had lost its balance. Even time itself seemed uncertain. Now look back at the arithmetic book. Remember that single word, divide. It becomes even more powerful once you understand what was happening outside this room. Because Europe wasn't only divided politically. Christianity itself was splitting into two competing worlds. On one side, the Catholic Church. On the other, the growing Protestant Reformation inspired by Martin Luther. Entire kingdoms had to choose where their loyalty belonged. And once they chose, there was often no going back. Wars followed. Persecution followed. Entire generations would live through conflict because of decisions being made during this exact period. One simple word, divide, suddenly becomes the theme of the entire painting. Then there is another object that almost everyone overlooks. A hymn book. Not just any hymn book. A carefully selected Lutheran hymnal, open to two very specific pages. One contains Martin Luther's hymn, Come Holy Spirit. The other, a shortened version of the Ten Commandments. Why those pages? Because despite everything happening across Europe, both Catholics and Protestants still recognized those teachings. It was one of the few things they still had in common. Holbein wasn't choosing pages randomly. He was showing both division and the last fragile thread still holding Christianity together. Now return to the broken lute. Earlier, it looked like a tiny artistic detail. Now, it means something far greater. Music only works when every string is in harmony. Break just one, and the entire instrument loses its balance. Holbein may have been saying the same thing about Europe. One broken relationship, one political decision, one religious conflict, And suddenly, an entire civilization falls out of tune. The painting isn't simply describing history. It's predicting its consequences. By now, you've probably noticed something. Every clue points toward the same idea. Division, conflict, uncertainty. Nothing inside this room feels accidental anymore. But here's where the mystery becomes even stranger. Because despite all these hidden messages, there is still one object in the painting that nobody could explain. Not the books, not the instruments, not the broken string. That strange gray shape, stretching across the floor. The object that confused people for centuries. And once you discover what it really is, everything else inside the painting suddenly makes perfect sense. Now, let's go back to the object that has confused people for almost 5 centuries. That strange gray shape stretched across the floor. The one that doesn't seem to belong anywhere in the painting. From the front, it looks meaningless, almost like someone dragged wet paint across the canvas. It interrupts the beautiful geometric floor beneath the ambassador's feet. It hides part of the pattern. It doesn't resemble an object, or a shadow, or anything recognizable. For generations, people simply ignored it. Some believed it had been damaged over time. Others assumed Holbein had left the painting unfinished. Even museum experts couldn't agree on what they were looking at. But the answer was never hidden. People were simply looking from the wrong place. Imagine standing directly in front of the painting. Nothing changes. The strange blur stays exactly the same. Now, walk slowly toward the far right side. Keep moving until you're almost standing beside the painting. Then, look back at it from a very sharp angle. Suddenly, the impossible happens. The blur disappears, and in its place, a perfectly shaped human skull appears. Not gradually, instantly, as if it had been hiding there all along. Because it had. This incredible illusion is created using a technique known as anamorphosis. An image is deliberately stretched and distorted, so it only looks correct when viewed from one precise angle. Today, we see similar illusions in street art and optical exhibits. But in 1533, this technique was almost unheard of. Even more remarkable, this is the only known painting in which Holbein ever used it. That alone tells us something important. If Holbein chose to use such a complicated technique, it had to serve a purpose. And that purpose wasn't simply to impress viewers. It was to deliver a message. But what message? Why hide a skull? The answer lies in one of the oldest ideas in Renaissance art. A concept known as memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning, remember that you must die. During the Renaissance, artists often included skulls, extinguished candles, or dying flowers in their paintings. Not to frighten people, but to remind them that wealth, beauty, power, and success never last forever. Death eventually comes for everyone. Kings, priests, scholars, ambassadors. No one escapes it. Holbein simply delivered that message in the most unforgettable way possible. He didn't place the skull on a table. He didn't hold it in someone's hand. He forced you to discover it yourself, only after changing your perspective. Almost as if you were saying, the truth is only visible when you're willing to look differently. Some historians believe the painting was originally displayed in a stairway or hallway. Visitors walking past it wouldn't first see the two ambassadors. They would see the skull. Only after continuing forward would the skull disappear, revealing two powerful men standing above it. Imagine that experience in the 16th century. Death first, power second, and finally, the realization that even the most powerful people in Europe were standing on top of their own mortality. It would have been unforgettable. But Holbein wasn't finished. He left one final secret, and it's hidden so well that thousands of visitors still walk past it without ever noticing. Look toward the upper left corner of the painting. Behind the large green curtain, almost disappearing into the shadows, you'll find a tiny crucifix. Only part of Christ's body is visible. The rest remains hidden. Most viewers never see it. And perhaps that was exactly Holbein's intention. Remember the year. England was breaking away from Rome. Religious symbols had become politically dangerous. Displaying the wrong belief could destroy your career. Or worse, Holbein doesn't remove the crucifix. He doesn't paint it boldly either. He hides it, still present, but almost invisible. Just like faith itself had become during one of Europe's most uncertain moments. That tiny crucifix, Roman 9, changes everything. Because now the painting contains three separate layers. The visible world, the hidden skull, and the almost invisible cross. Life, death, salvation, all existing inside the same image. Now step back one last time. Look at the ambassadors. Their expensive clothing, their scientific instruments, their books, their globes. Everything they believed represented knowledge, achievement, and human greatness. Every symbol of power fills this room. Yet every one of those achievements stands above a single skull. Holbein isn't mocking wealth. He isn't criticizing science. He's reminding us that no matter how much knowledge we collect, how much influence we gain, or how powerful we become, our lives remain temporary. That's why this painting still feels so modern. Because its message hasn't changed in nearly 500 years. We still chase success. We still measure status. We still surround ourselves with possessions. And sometimes, we forget the one thing every human life has in common. Time is limited. Perhaps that's why millions of people continue visiting this painting. Not simply to admire Holbein's incredible technique, but to experience the moment when confusion suddenly becomes clarity. The moment the strange gray blur transforms into a skull. The moment you realize it was never hidden. You simply weren't looking from the right perspective. And maybe that's the real lesson Holbein wanted to leave behind. Sometimes, the greatest truths aren't invisible. They simply require us to change the way we look. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden secrets behind one of history's greatest masterpieces, there are countless more paintings hiding incredible stories in plain sight. So subscribe, because next time, we're looking even closer